Hi, this is Kate, Teen Services Librarian at the Brighton District Library, and welcome to our paint along. So here's the supplies you are going to need for this painting. Additional information about supplies will be in the description, so take a check there and let's get started.
All right, so first off, what you're going to start with is your graphite transfer paper and your template. You'll have two, so you can either use the deer template with the scarf or with the bow. You're going to take your graphite paper and you want the lighter side of it is going to be face up. And you're going to put that down on top of your canvas. And then you're going to take your template, place it right over top where you centered, wherever you want it on the actual canvas board. And then once you have that set up, you're going to need a pencil, or you could use a pen if you don't have a pencil handy. And you're just going to start tracing over the lines of the drawing, and this is going to transfer it onto your canvas. So once you finish tracing all of this, you are going to lift it up and you will get to see your drawing transferred right onto your board. So ready for the next step. Okay, so for our paints for right now, we're going to use Ultramarine blue and titanium white. And if you have one of our painting kits in the cups, you're going to take some of that paint and put it on your palette if you can. Might not even use as much of what I have here. Then dip your brush in water, wipe off the excess on the side, and then go in with your white and with just a tiny bit of blue. And I'm going to do these directional marks throughout. They don't have to be you can just do them any which way. And by not following all the same stroke, it kind of makes it look a little bit like frozen ice. And I just kind of like add white where I want to and blue. I like to have it a little darker at the edges, and then I'm going lighter as I get closer to my drawing of the deer in the center. And this is mostly because when we get to painting that deer, which is going to be like a cream colored deer, it'll be easier if we make a mistake and accidentally go into our drawing if we use a lighter color there. Like, so if it's a very white with just a hint of blue that's overlapping the air, we can probably cover it up better than if it was a darker blue. If you feel confident in your painting skills of not going out of the lines, you can go darker. It is your painting. You can do whatever you want. But this is just the suggestion of what I've done and how I wanted to look. And like I said, you don't have to be super neat with the strokes or how they go. You're just going to do whatever feels right or what you think looks good. And you can overlap. You can make it more textured if you want. I tend to go light on the paint, so I'm not doing big, heavy, thick layers because it's going to dry faster if you have the thinner layer. And you can just keep going over it with your brush and just keep doing this until you have covered your whole background. All right, once you finish painting your background, a good idea would be to grab a blow dryer and start just blow drying on the cool setting over your paint to try and get that background to dry. If you did really thin layers like I did, it shouldn't take too long to dry enough for you to start the next part. Okay, next I'm going to use my cadmium yellow, just a little bit, I don't need tons, and my titanium white. Now I'm going to make sure I have a clean brush, and I'm going to take a little bit of that yellow and I'm going to blend some white into it. I don't need a lot. I'm just trying to get a cream off-white like color for my deer. So blend those together, make sure it's a separate spot. You don't want to contaminate your two colors completely because you might use them later. And it's a waste of paint if you make them all cream and you need that white for something else. And then I'm going to actually test my paint colors on my template. So this is something you can do through your entire painting. Just use that template to try and get the right colors that you want. Now that I have decided that's the color I want, I'm going to move on to the actual painting. So I'm just going to take that cream color and I am going to put it on, go and start filling in all of my deer. At this point, if you accidentally go over one of the other parts of it that isn't the deer, like the flowers or leaves or the scarf, or even the eye, it's not a big deal because we're using such a light color for this. It's going to cover it up. And while the canvas is white, as you can see while I'm painting, having just that slight difference of color makes it so it looks better. It gives you texture, and it also just it makes it pop a little more than just leaving the canvas blank. All right, so just go ahead and start filling in your deer's fur. I'm using the small brush and just little strokes. So just cover all of that with your cream colored paint. All right, next we're going to grab your red paint. I'm using it's called Crimson, and you don't need a lot. We're just going to put a little bit down for this part. You will use more of this red later, but for now we just need a very tiny bit. And I'm going to clean off my brush. I'm going to take some white, set a little bit off to the side, and then just grab a very tiny bit of red and put that into the white to get a pink color. And this is going to go on the inside of the ears on our deer. As you can see, it's very, very subtle. And you don't have to wait for your cream to be dry for this. It actually works a little bit better if it isn't. And then I'm going to go on the inside of the ear of the deer and just start putting in that pink color. And I'm going to try and let it fade out as I go down. And just go ahead and start laying that in very lightly on both of the ears. And that is about it. Actually, at this point, I'm going to add a little more white because, like I said, I was going to fade it out and put that into the air so I can blend it into the cream a little better. Like I said, it's going to very subtle, and this is going to look goofy until the very end. And then I'm going to go in more with the cream to go over it, just blend it a little bit more.
All right, so you're gonna let the cream color dry. You can use a blow dryer on cool setting again if you want to try and speed that up. And now we're going to paint the leaves on top of our deer's head. So I'm going to use a green. I have phthalo green for this, but any green will do. And I'm also going to take some of that yellow we used earlier to make different colored greens, give it more of a lighter tone. And I'm going to go and grab my template again to test out what green I'm going to use. So I have a couple of different leaf types. I have holly, and then I have poinsettia-like leaves on here. So I don't want them all to be the same exact color because that's boring on there. So just going to see me testing out a few. Like I said, we are going to use this template to test out our colors quite a bit. So once I kind of decide how I want that to look, I'm going to clean off my brush and get painting these greens. So I'm just going to go with almost a straight phthalo green for some of these leaves. You're going to want to use one of your smaller brushes for this because it's pretty intricate detail. And I'm going to use that dark phthalo green on my holly leaves. Do this. So it's going to go in, and I'm going to say right now this is fairly light, and I'm pretty sure if I remember correctly when I did this, I had to do multiple layers of green to get it the right color. So sometimes when you're doing this with certain colors, it takes more than one coat to get it to look right. So like I said, grab your detail brush and get painting. Right, remember when I said we are going to have to do more than one coat of green? Well, this is it. Also, I apologize for shaky camera that you might see. It's on there's technical difficulties happening. Hopefully it's not too bad. I just knocked into my table. Whoops. All right. So I'm going to go back in with that phthalo green. And I'm just going to do another coat over all of my leaves. After I finish painting in my holly leaves, I'm going to clean off my brush, and then I'm going to grab some yellow paint and some of my phthalo green and mix them together to make a slightly lighter shade of green for my poinsettia leaves, so that it just gives some depth and difference between the two different leaves, and it's not just big one splodge of the same green. So I'm going to take that small detail brush and go in. And actually the brush sets you're provided with, if you have one of our kits, is going to have smaller brushes than what I was working with. So this might be a little easier for you than it was for me trying to get that in and not get paint everywhere. Now that we have our base colors for our leaves going in, I'm actually going to take a tiny bit of white and add it to my green, just to make a slight lighter color. And I'm just going to go in and along the edges of some of my leaves put in some highlights, just to make it a little less flat. Um, and if your paint is still slightly wet, that's fine. It might work better if it's dry, but you can make this work. And I'm just going to do highlights along the side, maybe a line down the middle, just to give it a tiny bit of depth here. And so I'm going to start with all of my holly leaves to do that, because I just followed very lightly along the sides with some lines, once again using the detail brush. And then I'm going to take some of that phthalo green and I'm just going to put a line down the middle of my poinsettia leaves, just to give it a slight shadow to it. Okay, next we're going to move on to the flowers and berries. So we're actually going to need our crimson color or our red, and I'm going to use some ultramarine blue. Not a lot. It's just going to be a little bit so we can get a darker red. So I'm just going to take a very tiny bit and blend it in with the red. It's going to, and when I say a bit, just a little bit, because if you do too much, you're going to end up with a dark purple. So just put a little bit in, and this is going to go on our flowers here, so our poinsettias. So with your small detail brush, start filling those flowers in. I like to do them one at a time, so that way they're more clearly defined with our brush strokes. And when I paint, I always follow the lines of the same kind of the same direction of the flower. So you can see I'm going from the center on out. And let me zoom in here for you so you get a better idea of what I'm doing. Sorry for the shaky camera-ness of that. There we go. So now you can get a better idea of what this is going to look like up close. And I'm just going to fill that in. So this is kind of almost a pinky red, like it's magenta maybe. Don't really know what I want to call it right now, but this is our flower color. So just go ahead and can very carefully put in these flowers, and I'm gonna leave that little center part white, so a little bit of white in the middle, because I'm going to be putting in some yellow dots there later for the center of the flower, and it's going to be easier if I have that little bit of white in there to cover up with the yellow than if I try to put it over our red color. Okay, now I want to go and get some highlight on these flowers so they're a little more three-dimensional. So I'm just going to take a tiny bit of white and put it into my crimson and make a red. And I'm just going to drag a little line on one side of each petal of the flower just to give this a highlight in there. And it's not going to be super noticeable in the video, but when you're on your own painting, you should see it. And I'm just doing a very lightly thin line. And you don't need to blend it in, it's just there to give a tiny bit of a highlight. Now it is time for our berries. So for this, I'm just going straight to the crimson. I'm not blending it with another color at all. And then I'm just going to put in with my detail brush around those tiny little berries that we drew in, so making little round circles. And if they overlap with each other, it's all right. They don't need to be super defined. Um, we're going in with line work later in the black, and so this should be really easy. You can actually just do almost a dabbing motion if you need to fill those in, because I know they're very, very tiny, and they're just going to look like a red blob for the most part until we get into doing some stuff with them later. Okay, so clean off your brush. You want to, or grab a clean brush. You're going to need a tiny one, detail brush, and we're going to be using our yellow again. You just need a tiny bit on your brush, and then remember those centers that we left white? I'm just going to dab in a few little dots into that center of yellow. Um, it's just tiny. You just need to go up and down with your brush on it. You don't really need to actively move it around too much. So just a few dots just to indicate the center of the flower. Now that my flowers are done, I'm just going to do some cleanup. I can see some white spaces that look kind of awkward. So like where the leaf is behind one of the flowers here, I'm just going to go in with some green and just fill it in those spots just to make it look a little neater through there. You don't have to. You can always cover it up when we do the black painting line work later, but I'm picky, so I did it. Right, time to grab some more of our crimson red, and we are going to do our scarf. So I decided for mine, I'm going to do a candy cane striped scarf, and I'm just going to use the straight crimson red, not going to add anything to it, and then I'm just going to slowly start doing lines. And it's not going to be as straight. I'm going to kind of do this curve where I'm following where the folds were in my template. And I'm going to just do these little lines down. And that is going to be my first stripe. And then I'm just going to color it in, and I'm going to have my brush follow the shapes of that I laid down. So going downward and putting it in. You don't have to be perfect with this. We're going to be going in with some black lines over this, so it's going to add in your folds. So if you don't want to do shadow and shading or be super delicate, don't worry. It's still going to look good in the end when we go in with our outlining and things like that, because those lines will help us give more form to it than just doing shadows. So like I said, just take your red and go ahead and go down. If you want to make this easier on yourself, you could pick all red or all green and or any other color that you still have paint for, and do your scarf. Just don't use up all your black, because we're going to use quite a bit of it if you decide you want to have a black scarf for some reason. I don't recommend going with the black, because it's not going to have any depth when you try to put in your line work. But if you want to do what I'm doing here, just go ahead and start putting in some red blocks of color for your stripes. Okay, now that I'm finishing up the red stripes on my scarf, one of the last things I do, I'm going to take a little bit of my red and just do these little wispy ends to give like the scarf yarn strands there. and just touch up if I see any spots that I missed or the white is showing through. Okay, so very important part. Before we start the next step, everything else needs to be dry. All the other parts of your painting. So take out your blow dryer with a cool setting if you need to, and blow dry it before we go ahead and do our outlining. So on the outline, we are going to take our black. I'm using Mars Black, and that should be what you have in your kits if you got one from us. And I'm going to take a little bit of water. Use a thin brush. This is the thinnest one I had, but your kit should have a slightly thinner brush. And you are going to want to put a little bit of black on it. Make sure it's not just like hunking globs of black, because you don't want it dropping. And I am just going to start filling in my eyes first, because those are the most important. Now, something really important about this step, you don't want to just go in and completely fill it in black. If you notice on my reference sheet, there are little white highlights in the eye, and you want to leave those because it's the light reflecting off the eye, and it gives it more depth and makes your deer not look soulless. So I'm just going to leave a little bit of white showing through this, and then I'm going to go in and fill in with the black and follow my line work from that template that we transferred over with graphite paper. Like I said, you want to be really careful while you're doing this. Since it's black, it's easy to screw up, so just take your time. Don't try to rush through it, and just be very careful. If your paint feels like it's not flowing very well, just add a little bit of water onto your brush, not too much. Put a little more black on there. And you're just gonna start outlining and filling in all this line work. And this is what's going to make your deer look complete and finished and beautiful by the end of it. Yep. So I'm going to do my eyes first because those are the most important. And I'm going to give a little bit of eyelashes. And to do that, I just do very thin, light wisp. When you are painting on here, you don't need to press your brush super hard. If you brush it too hard into your canvas, it's going to give you thicker lines. And for this part, because it's so delicate, we want thin. So you're just going to want to do this very lightly. And then I'm going to move on to the nose. And the nose, much like the eyes, you want to leave a little bit of white on the edge to give it as a highlight, because deer noses are usually wet and black, so you'll see a little bit of lighter color. So it doesn't have to be a lot, just a little sliver of white on there. Okay, so already looking more like a deer at this point. Now a little more black, and now we go into the very tricky world of line art. So like I said, fine detail brush as always, and just going to have to go in. You're just going to want to be very, very careful that you don't press your hand onto where you've already painted. So if you're right-handed, start with the left side over, because there's going to be less chance that you'll accidentally rest your hand on the wet paint. And if you're left-handed, work from right to left on this. And also, if you need to, and you'll see me do this at some point, you can go and turn your canvas around. These are light, they're on a flat surface, so if you need to, you can turn it upside down. By the end of this, my painting does not stay right side up. So whatever you find easiest to do your line work, that's the way you should do it. So that's pretty much it. Everything is just going to be line work at this point. So just be really careful. If you are horrified by the idea of trying to do line work like this with paint, you could use a fine detail Sharpie if you wanted, if you happen to have one. The problem is it's not archival, so eventually fades over time to brown, and I don't know how smooth the lines are going to get. So I recommend doing it this way. If you want, you can always practice. I'm going to send this, we have this video and just take your time with it and enjoy it. And so hopefully by the end of this, you'll have a beautiful deer painting that you can either have to put up around the holidays or you can give away as a gift, whatever you want to do with it. All right, here I'm starting it on the ears, and you'll notice I'm kind of doing like these uneven strokes when I do this. That's because I want to kind of give an indication of fur. So I'm just doing these tiny little strokes on there as opposed to completely smooth lines. And then I'm going to go a little bit smoother on ears. And then I'm going to have to get into the details of the berries and everything. Like I said, use the tiniest brush for this. The brush that I had on hand wasn't as small as some of the ones that you have in your painting kit, and it made this a little bit more difficult. And here's where I'm going to flip this painting because it is a lot easier for me to not mess up my lines if I don't have to worry about accidentally setting my hand on my wet line work that I already did. So I'm going to flip it, and now there's less of a chance I'm going to screw it up, and then just very carefully start outlining these flowers and leaves, working from my left to right as I've done this entire line work. And I have to be very careful not to hit those eyes or the nose when I'm doing this. So just be very conscious of what you're doing when you're doing this part of it.